Right, in this second part of the lecture for business strategy, we are going to be understanding some of the key concepts involved in strategic planning. So if all of you pay attention towards the slides, in this particular lecture we are looking at covering the strategic concepts and terminology, things like role of strategy, mission, vision, objectives, goals, core competencies, strategic architecture, and obviously how the control is dealt when the planning is being done and what is the scope. Let's look at business strategy. Now the following are the learning outcomes that we are looking at covering. So we've covered understand the process of strategic planning. We should be able to formulate a business strategy or a new strategy from scratch, for which we will look at an example. Understand the approaches to evaluation and selection, and understand how to improve a chosen strategy. So for example, when a company deploys a strategy, if the strategy needs to be changed midway, how do you look at obviously changing or improving on the strategy? Let's look at what is strategy. Now, according to Huygens, this term strategy is defined as everything which is achieved by a commander, and it is basically characterized by a foresight, advantage, or an enterprise or a resolution. Now let's look at this definition in a bit more detail. Huygens, which basically defines strategy, he said that somebody who leads the strategy acts as a commander, and the characteristics of how he defines the strategy includes foresight. That means it involves future planning, looking at the future and then planning for it. It involves creating aims and objectives which define advantage for a particular company or an organization or an enterprise, and to a certain extent it also looks at defining resolutions or coming up with solutions to a particular problem. It is also looking at planning. When you look at it, it's all about planning to reach a vision which is which basically differentiates a company from its competitors in a positive way. So let's look at an example wherein if Nokia is trying to define a particular vision for itself in the smartphone market today, it is looking at solving a particular problem wherein it is become a laggard. It is lagging behind as compared to competition with respect to Samsung and Apple, and it is looking at creating a differentiation which helps it identify its weaknesses and then create something which will help it define its vision in a positive in a positive way. So it encompasses overall direction as well as many detailed activities that occur within a company. So vision is an overarching statement defined within the company which looks at differentiating the company, its product, its services from its competitors in a positive way, and it also covers various other aspects of in terms of activity, operations of the business or of the company in a particular geography. Now, in terms of strategy, let's look at another definition. Johnson defined strategy is a long-term direction of an organization. This is something which is defined for 5, 10, 15 years into the future, and it basically creates a direction for the organization to progress in the future. For example, as I mentioned earlier, long-term direction of Nokia is in mobile phones and in mobile computing, and it is looking at creating an ecosystem around that using Windows Mobile. This particular statement obviously is a bit old as compared to Nokia's current strategy and vision, where they are looking at creating a niche for themselves within the smartphone ecosystem. Let's look at three leading strategy theorists. Chandler. Now Chandler is cited as Johnson's in terms of his definition of strategy is the determination of long-term goals and objectives of an enterprise and the adoption of its course of action and the allocation of resources necessary to carry out those aims and objectives to reach the goal. So he emphasizes on a logical flow from determination of goals to objectives to allocation of resources, and this is one of the interesting definitions of strategy. Let's see how Porter defines it. Porter defines strategy as being different. That means he says that if you have to put a strategy in place, you have to create something different, and it means deliberately choosing different set of activities to deliver a unique mix of value. That means Porter basically emphasizes on the fact that if you are looking at creating a strategy, then you're looking at different set of activities which help the organization, the company or the business to deliver a unique mix of values. That means it helps the company deliver a unique set of products which has USPs and differentiators from its competitors. And his definition actually focuses on choices, deliberate choices which help create difference in terms of USPs or unique selling propositions from its competitors. Let's look at Mintzberg. Mintzberg defines strategy as a pattern in a stream of decisions. Mintzberg's definition basically emphasizes on the fact that strategy is nothing but a stream or a pattern of decisions which are taken to make the organizational more successful, or taken to achieve the organizational objectives. He uses the word pattern to allow the fact that strategies do not always follow a set chosen path or a logical plan, but they emerge in a more ad hoc way. And he believes in the fact that sometimes when you design a strategic plan, you are always not able to go as per that plan, but you have to take some of the building blocks of those plans actually work in a non-logical or a non-chronological order to ensure that the strategy is successful. Let's look at the levels of strategy. There are 3 levels of strategy. There is a corporate level strategy, there is a business level strategy, and there is an operational strategy. Let's look at the first one, business level strategy. Now, business level strategy is all about individual business, as the word signifies, business level, and this is particularly put in context to compete with a particular market. The strategy concern issues such as innovation, scale, and response to competitor they actually don't fit into the business level strategy. A business level strategy is basically looked at when you are defining, when you're running the operational side of things for a particular business in a particular geography. And this, the main 3 things which basically don't correlate directly to business level strategy, the 3 parameters are the scale, the response obviously to competitor, which basically are a fit in corporate level strategy. Let's look at the role of strategy. The role of strategy is basically based around customer accessibility or product variety or product delivery, and in some cases it puts emphasis on differentiating the company from its competition in a way that it is attractive to customers. It wants to purchase its product. Now, basically it means that you are trying to follow a sequence of steps which then lead to some sort of an action and basically communicate your thinking and ideology behind how customers perceive your product, why customers should buy your products, and why customers should be attracted towards your products. Now, in terms of statements, we have looked at mission, vision, objective, and scope. Let's look at some of the others. Now, very briefly, trying to correlate here, mission is related to goals, and they refer to the overriding purpose of the organization. That means the mission of, say for example, an organization like NASA is to explore the outer boundaries of space. So that's the mission of the organization. NASA as a space agency, is the mission of that organization is to explore other worlds, is to explore the outer boundaries of space. So in putting that into context, in what business is the business, in what are we in business for? That's the question that you need to be asking when you need to look at defining mission statement. And thus the mission statement helps managers focus on this, what is central to their strategy. Let's look at an example like Surf. Now Surf, it has it has become a generic brand, but Surf basically is a washing detergent. Now the basic ethos of the washing product is that it is a washing powder, and the strategy is to make that particular product one of the best products when you compare that with competition. Let's look at vision. Now vision relates to goal, and it refers to the desired future state of the organization. That means in other words, what do you want to achieve in the future? As the word vision signifies, you're looking at charting down a set of goals which will help you achieve that goal, the goals and objectives in the future. And a vision of this company is primarily futuristic. It is normally looking, it's a forward thinking statement. Let's look at objective. To be more precise, we're looking at quantifiable statements. Now, objectives are basically quantifiable statements for an organization, and they start at a particular time, and the company or the organization is able to achieve that objective in a particular point in time. So, for example, profitability or market share targets for a private company or an examination result for a school or a college are achievable objectives. Objectives also relate to strategy. And how do we look at relating the objective to a strategy is, in a college, you're looking at the objective of the college being that we would like to have a pass percentage of 93% in the academic year 2013 to 14. Now that's an objective. It is quantifiable, it is something which is achievable, and it is something which is significant in the present times. Let's look at scope. Organizational scope or domain actually refers through three dimensions. It is customers, geographical location, and the internal activities, which is internal activities which the company uses to produce products, goods, or services. For example, let's look at university. A university, the scope is in which the department is business. So let's look at scope. Within a particular university, there are various departments, and within various departments, there is a business department which looks at running the business management side of courses. So scope refers to having three key dimensions, which is customers. So the business department's customers are the students who are looking at studying BA Business Management. Geographical location for a university, it could be spread across in campuses, but the business side of courses are run probably in the London campus. And when you look at an extent of internal activities, that means the lecturers, the teaching and learning material which is actually used within the scope of delivery of that business course is the set of things which are required to run that at the university level. Let's understand business architecture. Now the aim of this particular few slides that we are looking at is to look at understanding the strategic architecture and how and who is called, who are the people involved in creating the strategy. What is strategic architecture? Strategic architecture is a roadmap of future that identifies core services and their enabling technology to support business requirements. And an architecture consists of key things like a roadmap in terms of services. It includes things like what services will be produced, what are the processes and the procedures or tools and other things required for the production of those goods and services. How will it affect living in terms of the purchase criteria, and last but not the least, how will that be communicated to its customers so that the customers are attracted towards the goods and services of the company. Now, what are the benefits of the strategic architecture? The strategic architecture actually delivers complete services instead of technology. That means if you are looking at deploying a particular solution or a service, let's look at a server infrastructure within a college. Now that server infrastructure, when it is deployed, it is a technology. That technology is being deployed to promote better print management, better centralized management of its resources, which could be related to printing, it could be related to the usage of the internet, it could be related to usage of software, things like that. That particular architecture, when it is created, before that is implemented, you are looking at creating an architecture in terms of how many PCs will be there, where will they be installed, who will use them, what are the key conditions in which they will be used, and how that solution will actually benefit a particular department. So within the IT department, they are able to collaborate and look at collaboration from other departments, because they are going to be the intended supplier and the other departments are going to be the intended users. It is built on a process-based philosophy for efficiency, reliability, and obviously ongoing improvements. Now, why is the college or university looking at deploying a centralized server in the university? Is because it wants efficiency, it wants reliability, it wants improvements in terms of productivity levels. So, a strategic architecture before a particular deployment of a solution or a product or services, the strategic architecture is created to define the key elements in terms of its usage within the organization. How do we look at building an architecture? We look at adopting an architectural framework. We also understand the key requirements of why and how the products and services are going to be deployed. We look at determining the scope of services. In terms of this particular server deployment, we are looking at understanding who will be using, which is a scope, how and where it will be used, for how long it will be used. This is all what will be defined in the scope. How do we look at defining a technology solution for each service? That means once the server has been deployed, the server will be able to cater to a lot of requirements. So it will be able to cater to print requirement, it will be able to cater to email services requirement, it will be able to cater to internet services requirement. So each particular service will also be defined in terms of its usability, in terms of its service level agreements. How will that technical solution be deployed, and what technologies will be required to deploy that solution? Now, a server being deployed is a hardware. Now, in terms of deploying, in terms of enabling that technology for its use, we will require an operating system which will go onto the server, and that will be a Windows 2008 server. So that is the technology which will enable the use of print, email and internet services. Let's look at how, imagine if this is being deployed by an IT solutions company. Now, how will they adopt a framework? They are looking at developing a vision for the overall IT service. That means they are basically intending to build a user manual or a map or a diagram which correlates the key users, the key suppliers, the key people who will be using and maintaining this technology or the solution deployed on a daily basis. Then they will develop a strategy to implement this particular solution. During that process, they will need to understand what are the business services. So does the business, or does that particular department, the business is basically a department here, does that particular department have a defined portfolio? So let's look at the business management department. The business management department basically will have a portfolio wherein they are running different types of courses. It could be BA Business Management, it could be BA Business Management Honors. Now they will also look at meeting a key set of people within the department. It could be the senior lecturers, the head of the department, and they will then try and understand a few key requirements, which is in terms of what service do they need, where are they currently suffering in terms of the service not being available, what are the intended advantages that they want to get out of the services in terms of this particular deployment of server. They will also try and understand the problem areas, and obviously if they've had any issues in the past, which will be also required to be investigated, so that once this solution is deployed, they are able to cover all the areas wherein this is becoming more efficient and productive as a whole, as a solution for the whole department is concerned. You will they will also as a company look at various documents, and obviously do a various number of surveys which will be classified to create a strategic map or an architecture before deploying the solution. One of the key elements that you look at, and let's look at an example, is a customer service center or a call center, wherein it is an example of a service portfolio. There are different accounts, there are different inquiries which come through the phone, email, through the website. There is a switchboard which is to look at, you have a EPPX in the call center. You're looking at a collection resolution. That means there are customers who are calling in for answers, and obviously there are different things which will be required to run this particular call center. The scope of services will include, this is an IT organization, it has an enterprise architecture. That means it will have database services where the customer details are stored, the responses are stored. They will have network services, that means which will include things like the PC infrastructure, the telephone lines being connected. It will have a service infrastructure, and it will also have a support infrastructure. That means when the call comes, automatically it's switched on to a caller which is not which is essentially free. Let's look at defining the solution. In this, if you are setting up a call center, you will look at identifying everything that you would want to do. We will need to group together activities which are related to call agents, which are related to people who are receiving inbound calls or making outbound calls. You will also look at a management responsibility. So there will be a management or a team which will be put in place, which will look at reviewing the service levels and how the calls are being answered. You will also look at having regular meetings, or possibly regular discussions to look at solutions of problems which are going to be encountered in the future. There will be the services. When you are starting a call center, you'll normally look at providing services for 4 to 5, 6, 7 types of different customers, and you will also look at, can we sell this call center setup to some of the other customers to attract more business. The solution, the technology, the solution which will be deployed will have key components like database services, network services, which are detailed a bit more. They will also have support services. That means over a point in time the call center will start building a knowledge database. That means certain key questions which are asked by customers that again and again are going to be built up into a database or a knowledge database, so that the call agents can actually use those as specific answers when dealing with customers. You will also look at putting service level agreements in place. That means a call needs to be answered, a resolution to the customer's problem needs to be achieved in a particular point in time. There will also be some logistical services. That means and you will also have certain telecom services. Logistic services would mean that in order for your business to continue on the call center setup, you will need to also keep prospecting clients in the future, so that you are able to bring in additional business to the call center, and the call center is not actually idle as a whole business. So the technology, telecom solutions that you will need is telephone system. You will need to have workflow management. You will need probably things like a quality assurance, and some of these things will actually fall within different heads, but have been listed here to make you understand that what does the solution incorporate. Now let's look at core competencies. Some of the core competencies which are required within the organization are defined. What is a core competence? A core competence is basically the strength or the key strengths of the organization. It is basically based on this a set of specific skills, activities, and obviously the resources that are put together to deliver a customer value. All businesses, as you know, today deliver value, and that is value in terms of shareholder value, that is value in terms of customer value, or product value, or services value, and that is what it differentiates the business from its competitors. And that is where you look at core competencies, that what is the existence, what is the key strength of that particular business. Let's look at strategic control. Now, strategic control are measures which are taken to synchronize outcomes, which can match as closely as the strategic planning. Now, let's look at this in a context. Now, a strategic control example would be a company has put in measures, checks and balances in place to ensure that its profitability does not fall below 10% this year. Now, those controls which have been put in place could be, example, no discounting. For example, the products, if they are being sold to the retail level, then the percentage discount which is given at the shop level is regulated, because that directly affects the profitability of the organization, and the strategic control has been put in place, which is then in turn managed by a regional manager. So imagine an organization which basically is in retailing. It sells products to its retail stores, and it has presence within Manchester. It has 10 stores and a regional manager and a shops and a store setup which involves a store manager with some of the sales employees. Now, in order for it to define a profit target, what are the key steps which it has identified is that there will be strict control on the nature of discount given from the outlets. So that is one of the activities which falls under strategic control. These checks and measures under strategic control are more financial related, or more to do with financial performance of the company. Here the organizational goals are defined by the top management. So if the profitability has to be defined for an organization, it is defined by the chief financial officer, and then that particular person puts strategic controls in place to make sure that at the end of the year the company is able to achieve a certain profitability target. Now, what do we call the chief accounting officer in an organization? Well, if you ask this question and not look at the slide, so in some organizations the chief accounting officer is called the financial controller. He's called the group financial controller if the companies, if the person looks after responsibilities for a group of companies. He also is called as the chief financial officer, and depending on the company and the operation, the terms does the terminology does vary, but more or less he is the custodian of defining the financials within the company, and he is basically the person responsible for giving out the financial information, which is normally through balance sheets or profit and loss accounts or annual reports at the end of the year. He is the one who basically looks at defining what will be given out in terms of rewards, and where the employees will be rewarded if they are able to produce that particular goal. Let's look at what are the strategic control methods. Now, strategic control methods within an organization let's look at they look at integrated quantitative and qualitative measures. They are financial and non-financial information measures. They are also looking at customer focus, which is an external in terms of control, because you cannot control your customers, you cannot control customers. You can define the way in which the customers interact with your brand or products or services, but you cannot control customers, so that's why that factor is external. You are able to define rewards based on relative contributions. That means you are able to define incentives or bonuses. If a particular store is doing quite well, then the staff in that store might get higher bonus or higher incentive. And one of the strategic controls could be you can define or encourage a desired organizational behavior. Now, that defined organizational behavior can also be used as a strategic control at the managerial or top management level. Okay, let's look at strategic thinking. We are looking at covering some key terms in today's lecture. So obviously, let's look at strategic thinking. Strategic thinking is nothing but what is defined as the future in terms of where do you think the organization will be. So it is basically the future direction of the company with respect to competition. It is looking at the forward thinking in terms of what the customers need will be 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the line. It is looking at gaining and maintaining competitive advantage. That means when you look at doing forward planning, you're basically looking at planning to see where and how will you gain advantage. When you look at strategic thinking, we are looking at a few analysis or a few models that we will look at. We look at the answer growth model, and we'll also look at portfolio analysis. Apart from that, when you look at some of these frameworks and models, I will be able to give you a few handouts which will be basically for additional reading, and these then will be used in the class to look at doing some activities. So let me just go ahead and distribute a few handouts which I expect you to read with regards to additional reading, and then come up with questions that we can discuss in the class. Okay, let's look at moving further, and let's look at covering a few models. Now let's look at strategic thinking. Let's quickly recap with a few slides. Now this is, in some cases, it is essential to improve business performance. Example, when you look at telecoms, for example, everybody carries a phone today, right? Now there is when you look at certain companies in the market, they have been thinking to introduce something new in the market which will help differentiate them from their competitors. When Apple introduced the iPhone in 2007, it defined a set particular gold standard for smartphones. It was touch, it did not have a keyboard, and it was a phone which did more than just speaking, the answering the calls or talking on the phone. So it did emails, it did photos, and it did a couple of other things using the applications. So in order to raise the bar of performance in your business, from where you will look at defining to a certain extent what goals and objectives that you will achieve, and also how you will be able to achieve your long-term vision, is basically the thinking behind strategic thinking. So it's a structured, progressive process which allows the company to move forward to a direction wherein it is able to achieve its vision. The basic elements of strategic thinking include The company, obviously, you need to have a vision. Where do you want to be today? Where do you want to be tomorrow? Where do you want to be as a company in 10 years down the line? You need to learn from your experience. You need to use time, your resources, and obviously, the resources in terms of money very efficiently and effectively. There are there are certain other factors that are required to look at creating strategic thinking in terms of planning, and in terms of translating them into goals or milestones. And obviously you need specialist advice in some cases from world recognized consultancies and firms which help you develop this strategic thinking as a process within the organization. Let's look at planning. Now, strategic thinking leads to strategic planning. Strategic planning is nothing but an overall process of planning that facilitates good management of a process. Now, assuming a simple layman's example is I intend on going from place A, location A to location B. Now, for me, if I've never been to location B, I will look at doing some strategic planning. That means I will at least look at the postcode of that location. I will try and basically look at Google Maps and see the place and the route that I will need to take. So in a simple way, strategic planning is nothing but the overall process of planning which helps you plan this particular journey. Now, when an organization looks at strategic planning, there are a few set of basic questions that you need to answer when you need to start looking at this. Now, one of the key things that comes to you is, who are we? Where are you as a company with respect to your competitors? What capacity do we have? What can we do? So, for example, Starbucks. Now, today that company, when it looks at getting into a strategic planning mode, it will look at key things like, who are we? We are a coffee brewer. What capacity do we have? How many, in terms of how many cups of coffee can we serve on a daily basis across the globe from our 24,000 outlets? What problems are we addressing? Are we able to address problems in terms of supply chain, issues in terms of delivery, issue in terms of logistics? Those are the things that they look at when they look at procurement, supply of drinks at a global scale across 24,000 outlets. What differences? How do they differentiate themselves from a competitor like Costa Cafe or Java Coffee? Things like that have to be considered. What are the critical issues in which they need to respond? Do customers look at some of the key, how customers perceive them, and what are the key critical issues they need to be able to adhere to so that the customers choose them over their competition? How do we look at allocating resources, and where are the priorities? Now, as a company, they are a large global organization. They have 24,000 outlets, 40 billion US dollars in turnover, about 36,000 employees. Now, the company, if it's looking at expanding, if it's looking at expansion, then it needs to allocate and prioritize where it will invest, in which markets it will invest, and how much will it invest, and will it give it some bottom line profitability if it's continuing to invest in that geography. So those are the questions which you need to answer when you look at strategic planning. Only once these questions are answered, it is possible to take a decision. So if they've decided to enter China 10 years back, they decided on the basis of certain planning that China will overtake US as a market, wherein they will acquire or have the ability to acquire 400 million customers who drink coffee. America is a market, 300 million people who drink coffee, but they will want to at some point in time go into China, and those are the things that they looked at. So they looked at defining using the process of strategic planning, what are the immediate objectives, what are the immediate steps that need to take to look at China as a market. How can they look at organizing themselves to get an entry into that market? What will be the implications of getting into that market, and how and when and where will they start? So that all constitutes an action planning kit, and a strategic planning then gets into action planning. Now, before we go forward, let's look at a few models which are quite important as compared in comparison to when you want to understand this particular unit. In this particular unit, we will look at Porter's 5 forces model. We will look at the BCG growth matrix. We will look at PEST model. We will also look at SWOT analysis as I've explained before, and we will at some point in time also look at the Ansoff model and also the SPACE and PIMS model to round off, covering a lot of key models which are used in terms of in terms of business strategy management, and also as tools and techniques within this when you will put this into implementation. So let's look at the BCG matrix first. Now BCG matrix is basically a matrix which was created by Boston Consulting Group, and it was developed as a model to manage a portfolio of different strategic business units or major product lines. Now the BCG is for Boston Consulting Group. It's essentially a growth share matrix, and it is divided into 2x2 cells, which is then used by business managers to look at strategic planning. This is a slide of how a BCG matrix looks like, and the BCG matrix basically consists of 4 different quadrants. The first quadrant on the left hand side is basically your cash cow. The second quadrant on the right hand side, top corner, is stars. Then you have question mark, and then you have the dog state. Now the BCG matrix, if I have to define BCG matrix, as I mentioned before, is used as a model to measure growth oblique market share with respect to your product portfolio. So it's a corporate planning tool which is used to portray a firm's brand portfolio or a number of strategic business units on a quadrant along relative market share axis. So on the horizontal side you have market growth, on the horizontal side you have relative market share, and on the vertical side you have market growth rate. Now growth share matrix, or is it called, as it also is called, the BCG matrix, is a tool which uses relative market share and industry growth rate factors to evaluate potential of business brand portfolio and suggest future investment strategies. Now this was a framework which was developed by the Boston Consulting Group, and at some point in time they were looking at doing an analysis for some of their customers, in which they then came up with this particular matrix. Now let's look at cash cow. Now there are 4 different quadrants, so let's look at cash cows. Now cash cows are typically large market shares in terms of when you look at businesses. A cash cow will be termed as a business wherein the earnings are quite high and the business revenues are stable. There's a good amount of cash flow coming into the organization, and the strategy which is employed with respect to cash cows is that your investment as a company, the company actually maintains its investment at the current level to get more business from the market. Let's look at the next stage, which is, say for example, stars. Now in stars, this is basically looking at a business within a product within the business which is in which the earnings are currently low, but it is stable, but the product category is growing, and the cash flow in that particular quadrant is neutral, and the strategy at some point in time is to invest into the business for growth. So when you look at product lines which are new products which are being introduced, when the smartphone from Apple was introduced in 2007, the company was actually investing in the product category, it was investing in advertising, it was investing in the R&D of that product so that the product could then be successful in the future. And today when we see 5-6 years down the line, the iPhone 5 which has been launched, we see that the company is selling the product in volumes. The company's strategy has been very successful, and it has been able to grow its market share and also has been able to grow its cash flow using just this product, and today it has become a cash cow. So products which are in the star stage at some point in time become cash cows. Let's look at question marks. Now in question marks, the company is not very sure whether this product is going to be successful in high growth markets, or the product actually has low market share, it is unstable, but it is growing. The cash flow is negative, that means the company is investing into this product, but it is not able to make profits out of that category. Here the company normally will employ a strategy to invest in the product to see if this particular product has a potential to become a star in the near future. If the potential is not there, then the company decides to divest or sell, but in most cases the company tries to invest in this particular category so that it can transform into a star at a future stage. Last but not the least, there is on the right hand side there is a category which is called dogs, wherein basically the product is at a dying stage. That means the market share of the product is falling. The market is quite mature in which the product is operating, and slowly the product is being replaced by either other products in the market, or there's a competitor which is eating up into that market share. Here normally the earnings are low and they are unstable. The cash flow is normally neutral or negative, and last but not the least, the company employs this strategy to divest. That means it is deciding to sell the business. A typical example which I always give is when you look at PCs, when they came in, the typewriter side of business was going out of the market. So the one of the key things when computers were initially used were for word processing and typing of documents. So when the computer came out, the typewriters went out of business, and slowly and gradually most of the companies which were which were producing typewriters divested the business, sold off the business, and either got out of that business or got into the PC business. So here what we've looked at is basically some of the key things with regards to the unit business strategy, and in the next part we will cover the key models that we are looking at understanding as tools and techniques required in this particular module. Thank you.